Alright. Welcome everyone to the presentation about the making of the Swedish Smash Ultimate PR and my involvement in it. I'd like to preface that I was not part of the panelists. The panelists were in fact Mike's, The Psych, Time Balloon, Schmixtape, J-Rose, Theros, and Gogong. I hope that's how it's pronounced. If not, I'm really sorry. And then the PR was a last-second decision, and the members were gathered quickly, probably through private means. A panelist was chosen on trying to get TOs that represented the regions from where the most likely candidate for top 15 were, represented different parts of Sweden, and were relative to the size of their own region, and relative to the amount of players that would likely represent the region in top 15. This explains why there's two players for Stockholm and two panelists for Stockholm and two panelists for Skåne. I hope I said that correct. You can make fun of my pronunciation. The steps in making the PR were as follows. They looked at all the Swedish events that they could find and they gathered meaningful ones. They determined which of these counted as locals, regionals, or majors. They determined the eligibility criteria from the events shown, after which they identified the qualified players. There was a ranking of the players through an algorithm that I made. They grabbed the 25 identified, and the 26th onwards were a cutoff point and therefore ignored. Then there was a head-to-head sheet that was created for these 25. There were a generation of win and loss percents on each other, made by me, and then the panelists created individual rankings order for top 15, and then an agreement and establishment of the actual PR. Steps 1 and 2, the event gathering. There were 38 events that were gathered to be thought of as meaningful. There were 3 majors in Bifrost, Midgard, and DreamHack, and initially 11 regionals in Northwind, Northern Clash, the 7 PXP monthlies, Höstlov's Smash, I murdered that, and Shieldbreakers number 48. In total, of the rest, there were 24 locals. Regionals and majors were the basis for qualification. Majors were pretty easy to identify. You know, it's not that hard to identify a Midgard from a Phoenix Blue, and it's not that hard to identify a Bifrost from a Phoenix Blue monthly. So it's pretty, it's pretty reasonable to assume that majors were easy to identify. The criteria used to determine a regional, however, was the following: the size, the competitiveness, the out-of-region invaders, the accessibility, the pricing, and the marketing. Steps 3 and 4, criteria and qualified players. The qualification criteria with this ended up being either, this was their choice, 2 majors, which in their defense was already hard to achieve because that would mean 2 out of 3 majors to attend to that were present in Sweden, 1 major and 3 regionals in an attempt to make 3 regionals count as 1 major in terms of attendance, 1 major plus Northwind and Northern Clash to be able to help out the north of Sweden who already had difficulty in attending tournaments that were regionals on the south of Sweden. The assumption, therefore, was that 1 major equated to 3 regionals in terms of attendance value, which made up 4 out of 14 events that you would have to attend to be qualified, which is 29% of events. And Northern Sweden had a slight help in qualification through the last stipulation of the eligibility criteria, which is 1 major plus Northwind plus Northern Clash. After this, there was retroactive consideration of PXP Weekly 1 as a regional, and also the further addition of the Skara's tournament, which became bigger than anyone expected, and therefore making the eligibility criteria, the amount of tournaments you would have to attend, 4 out of 16, which is 25% of majors and regionals combined. With these, I looked up the qualified players. They are as follows, and they are 55. I could tell you all of them by name, but I'm probably likely to murder some names, so you can have 20 seconds to look at them over. There are some obvious ones, like Big Chungus, Refuge, Mixtape, Rage, etc., etc., and there's also a bit more obscure ones. Like, for example, Yoink, Vulcan, Shlaka, people that perhaps you haven't heard a lot of, maybe not Yoink, but these are the people who qualified in terms of attendance. And let's get going. And so, this is where I come in. I identify the top 55. And then I made an algorithm for their placements, this involving some steps of their own. The first thing I did was gather the results for every regional and major for every qualified individual. I then gave each event a baseline value dependent on the quality of entrants. So did the qualified players' values based on minimum qualifications requirements, and therefore best performances of whatever criteria gives best result. This is because you don't want to punish players for playing more than they have to, and you want to reward them for playing the tournaments they went to for qualification. Then I also gave the players a value based on averages performances, and there's pros and cons to both. In my opinion, it is better representation of the Swedish scene would be the latter way of identifying your value or your placement value. This is because if you only count the peaks, then you are being a bit selective and a bit unfair to the other people who went to less, and at the same time, it kind of gives you an excuse to go to less tournaments as well. So I value the averages more. Having said this, I will now link the results of the algorithm. So everyone who is qualified, this is a placings algorithm. It's important for me to highlight that it is not a PR algorithm. This is a placings algorithm. The rest comes after. So this aimed to put a placement link on everyone in the top 55, or in the 55 qualified. You have the obvious people, right? Big Chungus, etc. But then after a while, it starts getting into deeper territory, like J-Bob over here, etc., etc. And if you are qualified, then you will see your name here. For example, email with the sum of your performances that are the best, you would have an average rating of 23. And instead, if we counted every performance, you would be at... I might be blind. Am I blind? 22. Not that far. So basically, if you were qualified, this is where you would be, more or less. So far, so good. Any questions? Any questions? I'm crazy. If not, then I guess I can continue. This was the cutoff point at the 25th mark. The colors indicated the people who were from the same region and therefore represented the TO that had to take charge of them. You had the best case scenario on the left and the average scenario on the right. One thing you'll notice immediately is that Time Balloon is really high in best case scenario. That's because one of the stipulations was 2 majors, and therefore to not penalize him for further competition, the algorithm ranked him very high because he got 5th at Midgard and 1st at DreamHack. I would actually prefer the usage of the average placement on the right, because that gives you an overview of the qualification of the people in general. That is pretty much what that means. So, here's the win rates. These are the win rates between all 25 people that were at the cutoff points between each other. You can see them here. For example, Email has a positive win rate against me, if I'm not mistaken, a 1-1 against Crown, 1-0 against Tylon, etc., etc. 2 against Leovin. So far so good, right? Everything understandable? Maybe I should obscure myself so you can see some of the lower ones. Is that good enough? I guess I can also block out. Let's see. I can also block this out and this. And now you should be able to see everything. So far, so good. I'm also going to go ahead and make it a bit smaller and do it for the top 15 instead. These are the top 15 in the order in which they were ranked on the PR. And you can see here the win rates between each other, how many they went even, and the losing records, how many there are. The color code is as follows. If it's green, it's better. And if it's red, it's worse. So far, so good, right? Let's keep going to top 10. This is the head-to-head to everyone versus the top 10. As you can see, obviously the value of the winning records goes higher the more up you go, and lower the down you go, of course. And the same goes for losing records, which are lower the higher you go, and higher the lower down you go. And then the last statistic, which is the top 5 order. So this is the win rate against the top 5. Seems reasonable, right? Nothing outlandish. I would like to point out that Rage is 9-2 on me. In reality, that's 9-0. In the sense that his 2 wins that I have, he did not play Bayo, so that might as well be 9-0. Very good. I have a winning record against TB, etc, etc. I actually have the highest win rate of between the top 5. Interesting. Alright. I'm just gonna keep myself off, I think, just to not obscure anything. And the last steps were involved. Should have put your number 1. Not gonna lie, that is incorrect. The last steps. The last steps involved having a unanimous agreement after creation of anonymous rankings between the 7 panelists. The panelists gathered gave their own individual rankings to the top 15, up to 25, which were then averaged out in a mean, as discussed by average vote. I will try and put my video back on. If it bothers, then I'll just remove it again. If there was a close placing, there would be further votes. You don't see the last thing, but it says simple but effective process, especially without getting too deep into statistics. So it was a lot of average means, you know, stuff of the sort, basic maths. And then if there was any kind of clash, of course, there would be further votes to determine actual placings. This is my version of the PR with the full algorithm. I mentioned before that the algorithm I had was a placings algorithm. Let me just disable myself here real quick. I keep forgetting where I am. There we go. So, the previous algorithm only takes into account placings, and evaluate the placings per tourneys depending on the quality of the players attending the tourneys. So far, so good. However, head-to-head is not included. And in statistics, in order to have a full amount of your dependent variable, you need to have every independent variable that explains the dependent variable. In this case, it would be placings and head-to-heads. The placings I showed you before, and the head-to-heads I showed you just now, and if you add them all together, you get this. This is a algorithm, full algorithm made PR. And honestly, I think it looks pretty impressive for what it is, especially since I disagree with some takes. But I would like to point out that the reason as to why Schmixtape is that Chungus is so low here and not second is because there was a retroactive consideration of PXP Weekly 1 to be included, and therefore that's the tournament where Schmixtape got second and Chungus got 5th. And we also had Scar included, which was a tournament where Rage got second over Time Balloon. So therefore, Rage is above Big Chungus. If you exclude both of these, in reality Chungus would be second, as I have shown in previous analytical algorithm-based things that I've posted on Twitter. So a few tournaments make a lot of difference. Alright, so here we go to the second part of this presentation. The first part was me explaining the process, and now I'm going to somewhat critique it. And I'm not critiquing the results, I'm critiquing the methodology. And there is a reason for this, so I hope you can stick around for just a second in order for me to promote my ideas. However, keep in mind that criticism does not mean disrespect. At all, as a matter of fact. And all I want to do is improve the PR making system for the entirety of Sweden, especially for those who aim to be written there, like I was before being put in there this year. So there are a few methodological things beyond the placings that are byproducts of the PR not being a running PR panel during the competitive year of 2022 that I don't agree with. This does not mean the current panelists did not do their jobs well. As a matter of fact, I would say they did their jobs very well, considering there was very little time. They were very stressed to pump out something of high quality, actually, within a month or so. So my first question that I'd like to ask is, what is a PR and who is it for? And I'd like to ask the stream this. What do you think is a PR and who is it for? And then I'm gonna give you my idea. Any chatters? If not, then I continue. PR for tryhards. Okay. That's one take. Anyone else? And for you, fair enough. A PR is for other regions. For other regions, interesting. Either for players or if people don't know which players are the best in the region. Okay, I can see it. I vaguely disagree with the PRs for other regions, and the reason I say this is because what I think a PR is actually, oh god, a celebration for the players who try their hardest to play the game and compete as much as possible. And I feel that for it to be for other regions, you would be giving a lot of value to other country wins, which is not inherently appropriate for me. So my definition for it is a celebration for players who tried their hardest to play the game and compete as much as possible. So then the age-old question comes along, and is how much should you participate to be eligible, considering the game is a hobby and not a job? The panel initially agreed with a 29% acceptance rates, 25% with the latest change, and it could have gone down to 12.5% if the tournaments joined were 2 majors instead of 1 major and 3 regionals. Personally, I think the requirements should be higher, because more attendance is equal to better data and less arbitrary penalties. For example, J-Bob went 2 majors, and yet, even though I think he has results that are worthy of being in the PR, beating Bali, and I think he might be higher than him on paper, he might have gotten penalized for not attending more. However, Zuri did not get the same treatment, because he participated the bare minimum, and yet the first Bifrost pumped his value extremely high, just being just below me on the PR. And therefore, I think having more attendance, meaning more data available, makes for less arbitrary, our judgments of whether to penalize someone or not for attending. Furthermore, Zuri and Jeros would be the only ones cut out of the PR if their requirements was instead 2 majors and 1 regional, which I think is more indicative of someone who went around to try and play the game as much as possible, especially in a situation where nobody even knew a PR was coming out. So therefore, you're rewarding someone for playing the game the bare minimum, but he didn't even know that was the bare minimum. And I feel that's a big deal, especially if done retroactively. Jeros competed a lot, but Zuri did not. So I think that it should be logical to make more regionals count 1 major. And we're gonna make more regionals count as 1 major instead of 2 majors. And this is gonna come out later in terms of math as to why this is, because this isn't the only beneficial factor for players, or rather the low attendance isn't just 25%, it gets even lower if we count a few things. And we'll get to that in a second. In the end, it is opinion. However, it's different determining eligibility during or after the end of a season. If before, people know what counts, and therefore what and how much to go to, and people don't have to be arbitrarily reduced in terms of attendance, or lower their value because of attendance. J-Bob wouldn't have to be reduced in value, etc., etc. That is very important. The less tournaments you need to go to, I see people can be just outside the requirements. For example, Zuri was just outside, as in he was bare minimum required for PR. If it's done after, one could retroactively decide to determine a tournament a regional to allow for someone they think should be eligible to be eligible. This is an unavoidable bias and not a critique. A running panel fixes this. Doubly true when faced with Sweden's somewhat unique situation. Nobody expected a PR, some people left out. And I would like to point out that although this isn't an attack on absolutely anyone, Zuri initially was not eligible. And PXB Weekly 1 was then considered retroactively a regional after suggestion from some panelists I'm not going to mention. And even though I think it was done in good faith, because they really thought PXB Weekly 1 was of regional worth or whatever, I think this is a big deal because it allows to make room for, don't want to say discrimination, but like why was KP in it? You could lower the requirements even more. or you could stretch them, etc., etc. So it is important for requirements to be either set up front or be consistent. That's kind of the end goal. The qualification events were as follows, and I agree with them. Size, competitiveness, out-of-region invaders, accessibility, pricing, and marketing, as mentioned before. I would like to, however, emphasize the accessibility point and rebrand it to equality of opportunity. With this introduced, I'd like to take a look at the events chosen to be key to qualifications to the PR, so the regionals, and comment on them. So let's start with the obvious. The PXP monthlies were the biggest consistent regionals clashes with some of the biggest prize pots in Sweden, as seen throughout Ultimate's lifespan relative to a non-major tournament. Jönköping is also geographically central. It makes sense to count these as regionals. This is 7 of them. So this 7 out of the, I think it's now 11 more, right? 13 majors were PXP monthlies. Now the Clash in Northwind should be 100% be considered a regional, as they were the north of Sweden's biggest events. Hi, thanks for the sub. As we have also seen from Stockholmers, they were also accessible to people outside of the north of Sweden. Qualification events, the less obvious. Shipbreakers number 48 in Stockholm and Hostlov Smash in Malmö also make sense in a different way. Hostlov Smash is more obvious, though not a lot of invaders from outside Southwest Sweden, when it comes to Swedes of course, but large in size and the competition was high from the country, from having Danish invasion from Denmark. Shipbreakers number 47 was considered a regional because of outside of Stockholm high-level Swedish invasions. This event hinges on the idea that it was retroactively, or rather post-tournament, considered to be as such, but in reality it was not advertised in this way, opposed to all the other events before. This is less obvious, but I do agree with its counting as a regional, especially since this was a consideration after the fact. I would argue, however, that intent is to give the biggest regions at least one home regional event to make it easier for players of said regions to meet qualification criteria. I think this is important because this is effectively lowering the requirements to 1 major and 2 regionals out of region. So far, we've talked about Shipbreakers, which is Stockholm, Hostlov Smash, which is in Malmö, and the PXP monthlies and Northern Clash. All of these have had at least 1 home regional, effectively meaning that you have to travel even less for attendance. Have you determined the biggest regions? I am not really sure how they would target them. This is my idea on why they did it this way, but I think it's because by biggest you mean the people who are more likely to end up having PR players. So therefore it's more of a quality thing, I would presume. However, this is my presumption. I'm not 100% sure. I was trying to argue for their point. So therefore, having it done this way, allowing for every major region to have 1 home regional, would make it easier for the people on there to qualify. And on top of this, if we think of Midgard and Bifrost being the home regionals for the Southwest Sweden and Stockholm respectively, then you have to travel even less for qualification. And this is still really strengthening the point that I think personally participation should have been higher. Because now, if you are living in Stockholm or Skåne, for example, now you only have to do 2 out-of-region regionals. Which, like, considering the fact that that PXP had 7 of them, it isn't exactly that hard. At least that's my opinion, of course. But yeah. And now we come to the questionable. The Skara tournament and the PXP Abilities 1 were retroactively chosen. The Skara tournament was chosen because there were a lot of out-of-region competitors. The competition therefore was pretty high. The price pot was pretty high. But I'd like to focus on the idea of equality of opportunity. The event was not perceived as a regional, at least through marketing. And you can see this, there was like a funny Pfeiffer comment in the chat of Skara of this tournament that said, "I did not know this event even was a thing." And honestly, that reflects a lot of the thoughts a lot of people had, I think. There were a lack of signups and the knowledge, and it was deep into the holidays. It also started at 6:30 p.m. I do not agree. I do not agree with the inclusion of this one as a regional. But now Gothenburg and Skara now have a home regional as well. Yes, weekly 1. It was the one that was capped. You're shaking the mic a bit? I'm sorry. PXP Weekly 1 was the last retroactive decision, and this was done even further than when the events were decided. And I think PXP Weekly 1 is an extremely odd choice to add to eligibility. There was a 20-man cap during Corona. It was the first reopening of the Phoenix Blue. It was the double vaccination rule, which in and out of itself is not a bad thing by any means. But this coupled with a 20-man cap in Sweden, because Swedish people were less likely to get vaccinated because there was a lot less push for it. There was a 5-day announcement period, and in the end there was even a wheel that people spun for people to get in at the end. And I'm pretty sure that Rage did not get the spot, but was it Grepe who did? Their argument is that the competition was comparable to at least a couple of PXP monthlies, but in my opinion, there was no equality of opportunity, like at all. The PXP monthlies were announced at the set time of the first of each month when there was a cap. This one was a 5-day announcement on a 20-man capped tournament. And furthermore, one cannot use the home region logic in helping Jönköping for qualify for PR, because they had 7 monthlies. And this event was also what they retroactively chose to make Zuri eligible. And now I'm not saying that I'm taking anything away from Zuri. I'm really happy for him to be part of the PR. However, keep in mind that this was the last event added after everything else was already decided. So you from an outsider's perspective, and even though I believe in the good faith of the panelists, you can see this as a way of arbitrarily opting someone in for eligibility that would be qualified as the PR, as a top 15 in the PR. And I'm not saying this was the case. I'm just saying that from an outsider's perspective, this is what you get. Which is another flaw of retroactively choose which regionals counted as majors. I think a lot of the problem with agreeing postseason whether an event is of regional value or not is that players suffer from asymmetric information, which in economics means that people were not available access to the same information. A lot of events were obviously regionals upon looking at them. For example, the huge amount of hype around PXP monthlies, having to wait a month for the event with a month announcement period, but others were a bit more debatable. As previously mentioned, I think the best fix to this problem is running PR panel for the following year. Who should be in the PR is another question to ask. Do the current panel seem fair for the players who are getting essentially assessed? Do you think you're well represented? Unsure how to fix this, and frankly, we should be thankful to them for having a PR at all this year. And honestly, even though I am ragging a bit on the methodology, I do mean this. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have had anything at all, and this presentation wouldn't even happen. At least there is something to criticize and improve on. At least there was something to assess people on. That's pretty much my take. And the last critique was the placings. Now, you have to realize that I wasn't here to rag on the placings at all. As a matter of fact, I got over it really fast. But the PR was made from the opinions of an aggregated group of people who value things in a certain way. And therefore, the way you value things might be different from the way I value things, etc., etc. However, if I were to point this out further, is that the algorithm accounts for placings. Placings are listed in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, etc. And it's not an even amount of numbers between each placing. This means that instead of looking at your placing as a score, you should look at the people around the algorithm's number as a bubble of people who average similar placements. Therefore, the ranking is not complete without head-to-heads, and head-to-heads act as a tiebreaker between people of similar placing. People who are next to each other in the rankings but have better quality/quantity of head-to-head wins should be above others. And here comes my critiques. I think Slioven should have been 9 or 10 instead of 12, for better head-to-head win records with everyone above him until Pfeiffer. And then you should swap myself with TB for having better win percents at all states of zoomed in, so top 25, top 15, top 10, and top 5, as well as having the positive head-to-heads versus him. I am currently 2-0 against him if I'm not mistaken. This without counting out-of-country wins, because if you start counting his Hope win at DreamHack, then you need to start counting my Ludo win at in Italy, etc., etc. If this PR had only been for the second half of the year, Chungus would be first, Schmixtape second, and then either TB or Rage would be third. Either way, this is neither here or there. Just to support my point, I would like to go up and show you the percents again. As you can see, I'm right here. Pipwolf, I have a 67. Time Balloon has a 56. And then let's look at Leoven, which is right here. Leoven has a... Actually, let's just zoom one more time. So, this is the top 15 ordered. I have a higher win rate than TB, whatever. I also have a losses. And then we have Leofen over here, which has a 36% win rate over everyone else above him up until Pfeiffer. His is a bit more debatable because the 55 here is actually higher than some of the people above him, but it is. Then we have the top 10, and you see myself having a better win, or the same win percent with TB, and you see Leoven having better or same win percent as Max over here, and actually a better loss percent than Max or Mint, so I think Leoven should be a bit higher as well. And if we zoom in for top 5, we see much of the same. I have the highest win percent of the top 5. And then Leoven has the highest win percent for the top 5 of everyone, effectively. Alright, let's move on. So if we move on, this is the conclusions. I'd like to make it clear one more time that this presentation was not meant to discredit the PR at all, and rather push forward the idea of a running PR as a better alternative to a last-second panel. I'd also like to repeat that the PR was done very last minute, so if anything, we should be thankful to these panelists who willingly tried to provide us with a ranking that can be appreciated by both Sweden and people outside of Sweden. Honestly, I'm personally very happy to finally be represented in this, represent this country through a PR, because that is something I've been working towards since 2020. So I'm personally very happy. And I like to thank everyone for the amazing competitive year. And even though I'm burnt out, I'll be here collecting data for now, for further projects. And then later, maybe competing. I'm not too sure about that part, but I'll think about it. So that was the end. Are there any questions? Thank you, Felix. Weekly 1 was crazy, but it doesn't deserve to be on here. I don't think it did. And the implications for having it in are actually really high. Because the reason for that is because there was a mixtape over Chongaswin, and there was a Zuri over... Zuri was there, and it was eligibility for Zuri. That's what that means. Why not include more people on the horizontal row? They were all 25. Okay, so you weren't here for it, but... So, I just refresh your mind. So, if you with earlier in the presentation, I showcased this. This, as you see here, and I'll send it to you again, is a algorithm for the value of the placings for everyone who is eligible in Sweden for the PR's conditions as the panelists set them, which were either 2 majors, 1 major and 3 regionals, or 1 major and Northwind and Northern Clash, both. I went ahead and made a algorithm for placements for the best placings, or rather the minimum amount of requirements, and an average placing, which would be an average amount of people. And then what the panelists did is that they decided to cut off it at 25, because they thought that everyone who would be part of the top 25 or top 15 would probably be somewhere in this zone. And honestly, they're correct. I feel that if you go further down, you see less likely names to be in. And after this, I made a head-to-head graph for the top 25 against the top 25, as you can see here. So this is 25, top of 25. And then I made a win rate graph on the top 15 ordered for the ranking. That they decided, of course, they decided on these placings. And then I made it for top 10. So it's everyone against the top 10. And then it's everyone from the top 15 against the top 5. That was the logic behind that. And I think it makes sense. I think it's pretty good visually. Any more questions? Well, I'm number 7, I'm number 6 on the data. Because you are number 6 on my stuff, but the panelists decided that you were worth 7th. Well, worth, I make it sound so high and mighty, but they decided that you were 7th on the actual PR, which is this. And therefore, this order right here is the order that mimics the head-to-heads. So Schmickstave, Chongos, Rage, TB, Pipwolf, Zuri, I refuse. Even though in every algorithm I saw that you were ranked 6th, they decided that you were below Zuri and myself. Fair. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's just opinion, right? The dude won Bifrost, so... I mean, it was this close to not making be eligible, but, I mean... Again, panelists value different things differently, so there is no kind of ill will or anything like that. It's just a matter of fact. There's no reason to be upset either way. If you think the panel doesn't, the results of the PR don't reflect your skill or whatever, then you can just prove it in the gameplay later. The age-old question of results versus perceived skill. Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually just results. It's just how you value the results. Like, for example, I still think that after all this, and I don't want to make this at all about me, but I still think that I should be above TB based on everything I've seen here. On top of, I have all the results, and he got 2 9 sets at PXP a while back, etc, etc. And I feel like the panelists just valued his win at DreamHack a lot more than the average of his tournament placings. And that's fine. That's fine. I was bitter about it for a while, but I mean, at the end of the day, I'm kind of just like you, Felix. I'm just kind of happy to be on the PR in the first place. It was a goal of 2020, so it's been a while. Any more questions? And I'd like to reiterate, I think I'm being pretty respectful here. I'm not trying to bash on anyone or anything. It's just my opinion. Yeah, but like no one is better at PR, you or I. I agree. Which is also why I think that they did a fantastic job in a short amount of time they had. I agree.